Alrighty, so this is going to be a tutorial for people who are interested in getting into Linux, but they don't know where to start. It's going to be a step-by-step tutorial, and it's not going to go into any details because I feel like it's more important to get someone into the environment than it is to, expound on all the details before they even have tried the OS. Um, so I'm going to make a couple decisions for you, and if you want to fork off at any time, you can. If you feel confident in your skills, it's fine. But this is going to be for brand new users. Alrighty, I think that's about it. So let's get started. The first thing I'm going to say is that we're going to be using, or we're going to be installing Manjaro, which is a distribution of Linux that I feel is very friendly to new users, especially those coming from like a Windows environment. So you could just go to the Manjaro website, go to their download page, and you're going to be met with this. Here's a bunch of different options of basically different flavors of Manjaro. I would recommend the top three are fine. I just wouldn't recommend the architect one, but you can choose whatever you want. You can watch the videos. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to go with XFCE. That's the one I started off with, and it was fine for the 4 to 6 months that I was using Manjaro. So you go here, you download, and it's going to download an ISO, which is basically a disk image, and you can download that to anywhere you want. It doesn't really matter. Just remember where you downloaded it. Alrighty. So I guess there is one decision you're going to have to make, which is, are you going to use virtualization or are you going to put it on a physical medium, the Linux OS that you're using? If you're using, I'm going to go over how to work both of those, so it's not really important that which one you pick. It's just you got to make that decision. So this next step is for people who are using physical mediums. They're not using virtualization. They're going to be placing it on their current machine, either dual booting or on an old laptop or something like that. So what you're going to need is a USB, preferably formatted with FAT32. If you don't know specifically what that means, that's not a big deal. Just plug in your USB, go here, click format, and make sure that it says FAT32 or change it to FAT32. I believe it has to be a USB that's 32 gigs or under, or you could partition it, but FAT32 is the one that works for me. Possible that it works with other stuff, but it just worked. FAT32 worked for me. So we have that. The next thing we're going to need is a software to flash the USB with the disk image that we just downloaded from Manjaro. I use Etcher. You can download this from you just type in Etcher into Google. This will be the first thing that pops up. Download that. I already have it downloaded, so I'm not going to need it. And run the setup. All right. So once the setup is done, just open it up. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it does. There we go. Finally. And you're going to make sure that this has the correct USB that you have, and you're going to select your image. Click the image that we just downloaded from Manjaro's website. Mine's just in downloads. Oops. Double click that. And you're going to flash it. It's going to say yes to that. All right. So I'm just going to let that go. So after this is done flashing, though, what you're going to want to do is take that USB and plug it into whatever device you're going to have Linux on, and get into that device's BIOS and make sure that you are booting first to the USB with the setup for Manjaro. The next part is going to be just for the people that are using virtualization, so just sit tight if you are, or just skip on to the next part, because this next part is going to be just for the people that are using virtualization. So the other option would be to run Linux on a virtual machine. Now, one method of doing that would be using VirtualBox, which is what I'm going to show you how to use here. So first thing you want to do is hit new. Just type in the name of your VirtualBox. I'm going to just type in Manjaro. And it automatically picks these two settings for you, so you don't even have to worry about that. And you can place it wherever you want. I'm going to place it on my storage. I have a specific folder for VirtualBoxes, and I'm going to hit next. Here's the amount of RAM that you want to give your virtual machine. I usually hit right around 4 gigs 4 gigs of RAM sounds about right, and it doesn't feel too sluggish if you do that. Virtual hard disk is fine. VDI is fine. Dynamically allocated is fine. Here's the only other option that you might want to mess around with is that it only gives 8 gigs of hard disk memory. You might want to ramp it up. I'm not going to, just because I'm probably not going to be using this virtual machine. Then you hit create and you let it do its thing. All right, so let's go into settings for the Manjaro machine. You want to go to system, processor, and I like to give it 2 CPUs. Just makes it feel a little bit better again. Next thing you want to do is go to display, and I just like to ramp that all the way up, the video memory all the way up. And then I also like to change this from, I would highly recommend changing this from VGA to VBox SVGA. And then the only other thing I believe that we need to do is in storage. So you hit this plus, you add the ISO that you've downloaded, so the Manjaro ISO, and then you hit OK. Now we can power up our virtual machine. And that's all right. And I'm going to move this out of the way. You can hit that. So now the people that are using VirtualBox and the people who are doing this on physical hardware should be at the same place, which is you should be booted into the setup for Manjaro and greeted with this "Welcome to Manjaro" screen. So what you want to do is hit this launch installer. You can also do it from the desktop, and hit your choose your language, choose your time, choose your keyboard. So this is where you actually make your decisions if you're on physical hardware. With virtualization, it doesn't really matter because you're obviously using a virtual machine. You could just erase the whole disk and choose that, and you can move on. But if you're using physical hardware, here's where you make your decision. You're either going to erase the whole disk, so that means that you are completely wiping out anything else that was on that, any other OS that was on that disk. So if you're using Windows, you're completely getting rid of Windows, that kind of stuff. So you can either do that, or you can do manual partitioning, which will allow you to resize a partition so that you can place Linux next to Windows or OS X, whatever you're using, and making a little place where Linux can live, and then you can choose on boot whether or not you're going to boot Windows or OS X or Linux. So obviously I'm using the virtual machine, so I'm going to just use the whole thing. A swap is, I don't really mess with it, especially on a virtual machine. I don't think that it's necessary, so I would just keep on going here. Here's just your credentials, pretty self-explanatory. And then I use the same password for the administrator account than the one that I just typed in, just because we're not, part of a corporation or anything like that. I like to select LibreOffice. It's nice to have LibreOffice. It's kind of a Linux response to Microsoft Office. It's really helpful to have, in my opinion. I know some people don't use it, but it's a pretty nice option to have. And there you go. You just hit install. And once this is done, I'll be back. Alrighty, so this is done. So I like to hit done, exit, and we're going to shut down, not restart, shut down the virtual machine and or whatever. We're going to shut down the installer. The next thing you want to do is, if you're on physical hardware, is take out that USB so you don't boot back into it. For virtual machines, what you want to do is you want to disconnect that ISO that we just connected. So go to storage, click the Manjaro ISO, and hit that, the little X, and then exit out, and then you can power it back on. Blah, 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 blah. And then we're gonna wait. what do you know? We're waiting. Here goes. So hopefully you made it to the screen, which means you've successfully installed Manjaro. Type in your credentials. And there you go. You are officially in a Linux environment. So hopefully if you're on physical hardware, you've got a nice big screen. If you're in VirtualBox, however, you may want to have, it take up this whole screen. And how I like to do that is just go down here and I go down to virtual screen and go to 920 by 1080. So you have a full screen. Takes a little bit sometimes. There you go. If it doesn't work at the first time, sometimes it helps to go down a resolution and then go back up. I don't know why that's the way it is, but it's worked for me. You can put it at full screen. And then, yeah, that's the other thing is after it actually decides to resize, you can also auto resize it to guest display. So then you have a nice full screen and everything should work out. If you want to mess around with optimizing it for VirtualBox, you can also insert guest additions. That also helps a lot. So if you want to try and mess around with that, I'm not going to get into it, but congrats on downloading Linux. You're all nerds. Cool beans, as some would say. Goodbye.